Hello, everybody, and welcome to Public Schools Week. My name is Randi Weingarten, and I am the president of the American Federation of Teachers, which is a 1.7 million member organization that represents a lot of people who make a difference in the lives of a lot of people. So we represent teachers and bus drivers and nurses, both in the public sector and the private sector, with the largest higher ed union. We are the fastest growing healthcare union, but our through line is that we represent people who make a difference in the lives of other people. And I start as a lawyer and as a high school social studies teacher, an AP Gov teacher in a career tech ed school in Brooklyn, New York. And so I am really delighted that so much of what we do in public schools is going to be discussed in this webinar. And this webinar is called The Language of Connection to Build Community Relationships. And in a couple of minutes, I'll introduce you to our panelists from today. And I'm going to queue up a message from a very, very, very special guest. But I want to just spend a minute talking about public schools and what they mean. I hope that this week we're all public school proud, because what our nation's public schools are is that they are they are the pathway, not for everyone, but for 90% of the kids in America. They're the pathway to personal development. They're the engines of economic opportunity. They're frankly the training grounds for civic engagement. They're frankly foundational to our democracy and our economy. And frankly, I think what we learned during COVID, when schools were closed for far too long a time, is that they are really the way in which communities structure themselves, both in terms of what parents need, really what kids need, but also how communities do and operate on a day-to-day and a week-to-week basis. And it's fitting today to say to all the administrators, teachers, other specialists, as I said, school bus drivers, counselors, nurses, school board members, administrators, I think I said that already, and particularly parents who are our partners. Thank you for all the work that you do to help our children grow and help them thrive. Now, for a long time, I have thought of as my North Star how to make every single public school a place where parents want to, where parents want to send their kids, where teachers want to teach, or all educators want to work, and most importantly, where kids thrive. Because if parents want to send their kids to a public school and they feel good about that school, if educators want to be there, more likely than not, those two things are ways in which we create a safe and welcoming environment where kids thrive. Now, today's conversation, we're going to explore what businesses and community leaders and policymakers need to hear about their local public schools. And we're going to learn together about how to make that happen, how teachers and counselors and school board leaders and administrators can expand and deepen their engagement with the public. And what we're really talking about is storytelling, not, all the words that we use in public schools that make people feel alien sometimes because they're words that they don't understand. I know that from my other profession. Every time somebody says reps, it's a loquitur or quid pro quo. It is a way that disconnects people. What storytelling does is connects people. And so at AFT, we're proud of what our Kids and Communities Need campaign, because it's not only grounded in how members make a difference in other people's lives and in kids' lives, but it's also grounded in how we tell the story of what we do and what's needed to help all kids succeed. Our Reading Opens the World campaign, we've given out 1 million books last year, and now we're giving out 1 million books this year to support literacy and critical thinking and having kids learn, be able to think and be able to pursue and become joyful, confident readers. So that's what we want to do. Talk about who we are, what we do, and why education is so important in a way that is relatable. And that is what storytelling is. problem solving and storytelling go hand in hand. Now, you may think, because of all the stuff that's going on in terms of culture wars and everything else, that parents and teachers are not together in terms of this noble and important work that we do for kids. But frankly, this is what we've seen. And this is from data that we had from December, in about a month after the election, the kind of surveying we do frequently, but where parents and the public was. What did they say? What they said was they want public schools to be better. And that by an 80-20 split, they said, if there's only one thing you can do, what we should be doing is strengthening public schools, not creating more private sector options. But what do parents really want? They want their kids to have fundamental skills in reading and math and science. They want all kids to have the opportunity to succeed. They want to develop critical thinking skills for their kids and reasoning skills and teaching practical life skills and preparing kids to succeed in college or career. That's where parents are. That's where the public is. And that's where educators are. The real question is, will we do what we need to do to make this a reality for all kids? Will we help support teachers in this work, educators in this work? And how do we do that? How do we make sure we address the teacher shortage, the nursing shortage? How do we lower class sizes? How do we meet the emotional, social, and academic needs of kids? How do we deal with learning loss? How do we create pathways for all the careers that are happening right now as we go to a new industrial age of advanced manufacturing in this country, as we deal with climate sustainability? There's so much that's positive, but what are we going to do in schools to actually make that happen? So I'm going to end by just talking about the S's. First is storytelling. First is solutions. What are the solutions that we need to do together to help? Second is, how do we work together? How do we have solidarity with each other? The third is, how do we show up for each other? That's what creates trust. Whether joyous or sad, how do we actually work in community with each other so that people feel, particularly in the aftermath of COVID, that we have each other's back? And fourth is talking about these stories. Stories of the who, the what, the how, the why of our public schools, and the millions of people who work and volunteer in them every single day for our kids. So we'll get to our stories and how to share them right after these words from a very important special guest. It's my honor to share the message of a good friend of all of ours, a great friend of public schools, the Secretary of Education, United States Education Secretary, Miguel Cardona.
Hey everyone, I'm U.S. Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona. Happy National Public Education Week. Thanks to Learning First and our wonderful practitioners, you shine an important spotlight on our nation's public schools. I'm a product of public schools myself. I think of my very first day at John Berry Elementary School as a student, my first day at Israel Putnam Elementary School as a fourth grade teacher, and countless first days dropping off my son and daughter at their public schools. All of this in the place where I grew up and where I became who I am today, in Meriden, Connecticut. It's a reminder of the power of public schools, not only to open doors, but to strengthen communities. That's why transforming our education system starts with raising the bar in our public schools. For so many students, what their public school offers is all they have. That means we need to start with ensuring that every public school in the community, in every state across the country, is safe, it's equitable and engaging. And tapping into the unique assets and talents of our school communities is something that we should strive to do. Our students should have access to the kinds of teachers and neighbors in their lives who know best what they need. It means supporting students from cradle to career and boldly addressing opportunity and achievement gaps. It means supporting our students' mental health and their social emotional well-being. The good news is we have unprecedented resources to do this work. We've doubled the amount of community schools funding from $75 million to $150 million in just 1 year. And the Department of Education recently announced $63 million in new 5-year full-service community schools grants to expand existing community schools. We're excited about this work. Our public schools do so much for our nation's students. And if we work together, we can raise the bar even higher. So let's embrace this moment in education to reimagine our schools. Let's ensure every child from every background has the academic, social, emotional, and mental health supports they need to learn and grow. Let's ensure that our schools promote multilingual education and honor different languages and different cultures. And let's embrace this moment today to prepare our students for the beautifully diverse and changing world of tomorrow. Because as the saying goes, our students' minds are not buckets to fill, but fires to be ignited. Together, let's ensure that the fire burns bright for every student. Let's ensure that the road to success for our students continues to run straight through America's public schools, and that the best days of education are still ahead of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Cardona. And it is a delight that we all get to work with him each and every day. I would like to introduce our next guest, who is Jerry Gallagher. And Jerry is a partner, there he is, with the Donovan Group, which is a national schools comms firm. And boy, do we need that kind of work right now, Jerry. But before joining the Donovan Group, Jerry spent 18 years as a news anchor and a broadcast journalist. He earned a Midwest Regional Emmy in 2015 for his story, Brothers in Arms, about his father's trip on an honor flight. And he has received, that's not the only Emmy or Emmy nomination he has received. He's reported on a lot of stuff in education, including a special report. We were just talking about this earlier, Common Core state standards, the good, the bad, the ugly of what happened in terms of Common Core. So, Jerry, you've reported stories. So welcome first. You've reported stories, and now you've advised school districts and education groups. So tell us a little bit about what you do. And most importantly, what do you look for in a powerful education story? What are the elements that you look for in terms of that kind of storytelling?
Thank you, Randy. I work for the Donovan Group, which is a national school communications firm, and we are working with schools every single day to help guide them through many of the things that you just talked about in terms of making sure that the right story is being told about the great work that is happening every single day. And with that in mind, because I have been on the other side, and I was for a long time, of what makes a good education story. As a reporter, I always felt that it was a mix of facts and feelings. So as a reporter, I wanted to be told something that I didn't already know. You know, one of the best attributes of a good reporter is that they know a little about a lot. As a reporter, I always wanted to be that person at a get-together that seemed to know something about every topic. So does the story enlighten me? And also, does it strike an emotional chord with me or with the audience? Now, to clarify that, that doesn't mean that it has to be a story that will make you cry. We all can have an emotional connection with something like our wallet, for instance. So what we know is that the more connected you are emotionally to a topic, the more invested you will be, and then you will come back to that source time and again because of it. So does a story elicit feelings, and does it elicit and does it deliver facts? So feelings and the facts are the two things that we would generally look for.
That is really great advice. And so now I'm going to ask you a couple of kind of tricks of the trade, which is, you know, how can a school or a district effectively pitch a story? And I would assume that that question assumes that we don't want to keep secret what we're doing in schools. that we actually want to open up. We want to be transparent. And I'm sure you get that kind of reticence too, particularly in the age of social media and the age of all of these culture wars. So when I'm asking how can a school or a district effectively pitch a story, I'm also asking you to answer the why. Why should a school or district pitch a story?
Well, the school should pitch a story because they want to engage their stakeholders in a different way, to be able to pull back that curtain, to get them in the classroom more on a daily basis than we ever have before. I think, Randy, that's a big difference with school comms over the last 10 years or so, that I think that we could always rest behind that trust between the community and the school district for years and years. And so if the community was only in your buildings, maybe for a play or for a Friday night basketball game, that was good enough. But with so many external factors pulling and tugging at us and trying to get us to pit each other against each other, that it's important for us to be able to pull back the curtain and show what's happening in that third grade classroom, in that high school chemistry classroom. So that's the first thing. I think that's the why. So what makes a good story pitch? If
We're all writing this down, Jerry.
well, brevity and timing, Randy. I think that those are two key things. I mean, first, with brevity, a reporter does not want to click through in an email. So making sure that everything is laid out in the body of that email. Make that story pitch in bullet points, because a reporter thinks in bullet points. When you see a news anchor reading a teleprompter, oftentimes that's not in paragraph form. Those are in bullet points. And so creating a story pitch like that is going to benefit you. Creating a schedule for the reporter in the email. So here's the topic. We have this person available to interview at this time, like laying it out for them very easily. And then the timing of it too, Randy, is very important. Knowing when to make the story pitch about the great thing that's going on in your school. There is a widely held belief that the news cycle is 24/7. In many communities, there is actually a restart on that. And that happens on Monday morning. The weekend news in a newsroom typically includes things like overnight crime, sports, craft fairs, those kinds of things that happen on the weekend. Well, reporters come into the assignment meetings on Monday morning. They are looking for a fresh start to the week. So if you can get to a reporter's inbox with a good idea by Sunday night, your odds of that story being covered go up.
So that actually leads me to a couple of other questions. But one of the things, Jerry, that I want you to talk about, so I'm going to ask you, how do schools develop working relationships with reporters? And I'm also going to ask you, to give us some examples of really good ed stories. I'm going to ask you those two questions, which I know you can answer, with your eyes closed. But what you're also raising is the importance of local journalism and local newspapers. And could you talk a little bit about that importance, about that, just like the importance of local schools?
Well, think of it in terms of politics, and what we've heard for years, Randy, is that politics is local. And the most important decisions are made at the local level. And the same can be true about those who are covering your issues and covering you. It's so important to be able to engage and develop relationships with your local media outlets, because what they're doing is at the fabric of what America represents, in covering those school board meetings and covering those Friday night basketball games and really showing what's going on in the classroom. And so it's been difficult in that world for many years. They are struggling. Journalism is a very stressed industry. Budgets are tight. Reporters are being asked to cover more with less. And so it's important, and that's why I go back to the brevity sense. It's important for us to really be able to hone how we story pitch to a reporter, because they don't have a lot of time to be able to sift through a full narrative. And so we have to be mindful of that, and also cognizant of how much more difficult their job has become as well.
So I assume you're going to say that you have to answer the phone when a reporter calls, and don't say no comment. But that's probably not the only thing we should be doing in terms of developing working relationships with reporters. So answer the phone, don't say no comment, but what else should we be doing to create that working relationship?
I would flip it, Randy. I would say initiate the phone call, jumpstart the relationship. And so where I'm going with that is go to the website of that media outlet in your community and look at the biographies of the reporters that cover the news in your community. Find a reporter that's homegrown. Maybe they have kids in your school district. If they do, I guarantee you they will be likely to be more invested in your community than someone who might be using that newspaper or television station as a launch pad for them to get to a bigger market. So find somebody that you believe is invested and then send them a note. Initiate a relationship, give them feedback on a story that's completely unrelated to education. Maybe they did something on a business coming to town. Give them feedback. Most people in this industry, in a performance industry, which is what it is, they have egos and they crave feedback. And so if you do that, what you have just done right there, and maybe it's subconscious, but you have opened the door to cultivating a productive professional relationship with a reporter. And so after you have initiated, that's where you can begin a conversation with them about education, sharing what makes your school stand out, and then eventually inviting them into your building.
That's fantastic advice. So as before we leave you, I know we're going to pull you back a quarter to with our other two guests, but how about, and I'm sure you've thought about this, an example or two of a really good education story, like a pitch that you have done that has worked, really good story that printed or on TV or podcast.
I would say the Common Core thing as a big story idea, Common Core standards. And why I thought that was a really good pitch from the educator to me is because this was a brand new legislative topic that I had no idea about. And we all know that whatever industry you're in, whether it's journalism or something else, it's about a lifelong learning process. And if you aren't learning on the job every single day, then you probably should choose some other line of work, because that's what drives us and inspires us and keeps the blood flowing. And when I got that story pitch of, here we're seeing that could change the face of education and people don't know about it. Can you help us explain this? And doing so in a television story and doing so in 2 to 3 minutes was very difficult. And that was a challenge that I was willing to accept. And always know that reporters are up for challenges. And so to get into their inbox, get them on the phone and say, we think that this could be a potential Emmy Award winning story, because it's not an easy one. Are you willing to engage with me to be able to tell the public about it? That's a story pitch. And you've got my attention as a reporter right away.
Well, thank you, Jerry. Thank you for that very, very, very tangible advice, which I'm sure everybody who's watching or will be listening to this or watching it later really, really needs, or at least school districts and schools and unions really need. So really, thank you. And we'll bring you back in near the end of this hour. So I get to introduce right now Stephen Wakefield. Stephen is the Senior Vice President of Global Communications for Discovery Education, and he's been doing this job for quite a while. And Discovery Education is a learning company that many of us have either used, watched, been engaged with. They provide content and tools to help teachers in so many different ways. And it's really the work that they have done has really helped us offer innovative and engaging learning experiences for our kids. But he didn't, he's been involved in education for more than the last 16 years, Before he took that position, he was the director of comms for ASCD. And there he developed the organization's strategic comms and other functions, including PR functions. And many of us still get that ASCD magazine all the time. I happen to read it every now and then. So thank you, Stephen, for being with us.
Thank
And
you for having me.
you're welcome. I'm glad you're here. And just, I think what's important is that you're on the business end of this now. And, there are many times those of us who are steeped in education, we either don't understand the business end or look at some of the business end warily because there are some, business leaders who want, vouchers or other things. And so there's a wariness, but there is a business end to our work. In any kind of public good work, there's a business end to it. So, but why don't you help us do that interface in terms of, the business and what the business community also really, really, really needs from us in education. Help us do the translation.
Certainly. Once again, thanks for having me. You're absolutely right that there is a whole host of partners in the United States who are helping public educators each day engage their students in learning. And we take our role as partners incredibly seriously. Our goal is to elevate and celebrate the work of public educators across the country as it relates to the use of our services. What we want to do is we want to showcase to reporters, to policymakers, and to others the success that public educators as well as their students are having with the digital resources we provide. And looking back to my experience at ASCD, quite frankly, storytelling is storytelling. No matter how you slice it, whether you're an educator or you're a company. Jerry provided a lot of great points, but two that I'd like to add to the points that he raised were the importance of making your stories accessible and relatable. Accessible insofar as, and I think you alluded to it earlier, Randy, education can be a jargony topic, and educators sometimes have a language all their own. It's important for no matter who's telling the story, whether the storyteller is in the business community or in the education community, to make that accessible to the everyman. I have some great neighbors who are parents as well, and I always like to try out a story. Hey, what do you think of this? Does this make sense? And if they understand it, if it's in a way that my language is in a way that they're quickly grasping the idea, that's a win, and that's a story, and that's a great way to pitch that story. The second is the relatability of the story. It's important for those of us who are going out to media to share the great stories of what's going on in public education, to share stories that make sense and that show the difference that educators are making. Every day, public school educators are engaged in preparing students for success and citizenship beyond graduation. There are a ton of relatable stories in there. There are a ton of stories that make a difference in the local communities in which our public schools are. So it's important for any storyteller, whether it be myself or the PR teams at our public schools, to tell those relatable stories to make sure that their communities understand the importance of their work every day.
I think that's really, really good advice, Stephen. And I think when you say that in terms of relatable, I think sometimes people in education think that what they're doing is not interesting enough to other people. Like that, like that proverbial light bulb that goes off, the story about a robotics class where kids are so engaged, you can show that somebody, I often hear somebody say, oh no, that's not interesting to others. How do you how do we convince our colleagues that, yeah, of course, that's interesting. And in some ways, that's what shows hope in the face of all these tough challenges that we have. So help us, help as a comms professional and as a help give us some guidance on that.
Well, I think at the most granular level, we're talking about people's children at the end of the day, and we're talking about the future of our country. In my mind, there's nothing more relatable than children, and there's nothing more important than the future of our country. So I would consider, I would suggest to my colleagues in the communications world to step back a moment. Sometimes when you're really close to a topic, it's hard to get that distance, and it's hard to realize just how important your work is. Take a breath, realize how important your work is, realize the gravity of what you do every day, and then approach it from there. The only other thing I'd like to add to my point is that it's important also to explain to local communities just how much schools have changed in the last 3 years, in the last 5 years, in the last 10 years. I'm of the age where I walk into a classroom and it looks absolutely nothing like my classroom of 1977. Because you went to school doesn't mean that you understand what school looks like. So educators who are seeking to tell the stories in their community of what's going on in their school districts need to take that under advisement and consider that as they're going out to tell their stories. It's a different world out there. They're doing amazing things every day, and it's imperative that they get the story out.
Thank you, Stephen. And I'm going to come back to you after I introduce Betty, and then we're going to have a brief conversation with all three of these terrific panelists. So our last guest is Betty Wilson McSwain, who is the president of the Mississippi affiliate of Learning Forward. She is assistant superintendent for federal programs and testing for the Macomb School District in Mississippi. I can't. I'm mumbling my words today. I'm sorry, Betty. But over her 33-year education career, Betty has been a teacher, an assistant principal, a voc ed director, a curriculum director, and a federal programs director. I just want to ask you, what do you do in your free time, if you have any? But Learning Forward has done this remarkable work in terms of reading and literacy that all of us should be learning from. And so I am sure you can teach us a lot here. But so the first, since we're talking about storytelling, I would first ask you, before I ask you for examples, why is it important for educators to tell their stories? And again, the same question I asked Jerry, what makes those stories effective?
Okay. First of all, thank you so much for having me. And as a Learning Forward member, I am always amazed at how they build our advocacy skills, and particularly around the Title II dollars, because those dollars are specifically for educators and building the capacity of teachers and leaders in order to impact our students. And so telling your story is very important, because how do our congressional delegation know how to vote if they don't know what's happening back at the local districts? And so we want to make sure that we're doing letter writing campaigns, that we're doing phone calls, but we also, I've heard a lot about publishing those stories that reach those persons who are going to make decisions. Those decisions and those funding allocations are so important that we can continue to the work that we're doing and do it even better. Of course, we did learn during the pandemic that a lot of things can be done in a different manner. We learned that a lot of children have social and emotional concerns, but so do the adults. And so now we're on a trajectory of learning and how to incorporate the social and emotional piece within the academic piece. But the funding has to be there. The policies, even to protect best practices, have to be there. And so I am very, very proud of what Learning Forward does, how they support even the affiliates to tell our stories at the local and state level, not just to impact what we're doing in our district, but also to impact what our state legislators and congressmen are actually funding, but also making into laws in order to protect what needs to happen for each and every child.
So how do you use storytelling to help that along? Because most people find that the policies around what we do are mind-numbing. The words are inaccessible. And what you've done it from Learning Forward, you've actually made it accessible. So give us either give us an example of storytelling or tell us how that secret sauce. How'd you do it? What are the stories that you're telling, or both?
Okay. So one of the stories, of course, is always about student achievement. The story of where were you, what's the baseline data or prerequisite data, but then what is the story of how did you achieve those goals, those objectives you set, those visions, and a lot of visions are high-powered visions. We want students to change the world. We want students to compete on societies, but what does that look like in practice? So to tell those stories of how is very, very important. On the Learning Forward websites, there are a lot of data stories where they published actually, here's what happened in this district by the numbers, by the qualitative data. And so to tell those stories, first of all, where can we replicate things that are happening and things that are happening and very well? And one of the things that we do in Mississippi is that we spotlight schools. Those schools where demographics look like our demographics, where teacher shortages is a real situation in all our districts. So how are you overcoming those challenges and students are still excelling or achieving at a high level? And so yearly we spotlight schools. This past year in November, we spotlighted 5 school districts with specific schools of how they grew, not just high achievement, but what was the baseline? What is the story to the how? And we did a panel discussion because everybody in the room, your ears light up, because I want to do that in my district. I want to replicate the success in my context, in my environment. And so to share those stories, another thing it does is provides hope. Because if you can do it, I can do it also. And that's important. That's important to parents. If we can do it in this part of Mississippi or this part of Louisiana, or this part of Southwest of the United States, the Southeastern part of the United States, then those things can be done right here where we are as well.
So look, that begs the last question I'm going to ask you before I bring everybody else in. You've spent a lot of time, boots on the ground, doing all this work. How, and I'm sure based upon the answer to your last question, people sometimes are incredulous and they're like, wow, you did that in Mississippi? Because of all of the stereotypes that we try to debunk. But how do you connect? You talked about hope here. How do you connect storytelling to hope? And how do you connect your really lived and learned experience from boots on the ground to that? How do you in particular, Betty, how have you done that?
Okay. One of the things that we've done is we looked at the response to interventions. That's something that specifically I work with, particularly when we look at federal dollars and how are we ensuring equitable opportunities and excellent opportunities for all children. And so I take the experiences over the past 33 years as a classroom teacher, as a career and technical director, and knowing that when we can connect the economy, we can connect jobs to academic learning, that's something that does provide hope. I also look at, again, I never stop. I never want to be at the bottom. I don't want to even be at the top of the bottom. And so when we look at our state and when we look at how we're growing, we want to publicize that. Our 4th grade NAEP score showed that they were some of the highest growth areas in the nation. But we want to also make sure that that's happening in every pocket of that accountability system. Another thing that we do here in Mississippi, we are a part of the National Center for Education and the Economy. And what they do is they do a study of high-performing schools and high-performing school systems and what's happening in those systems and how do we replicate those things in Mississippi. Right now, there's legislation on the table where there's going to be a study group about those high-performing districts. There are international high-performing districts, and how do we study that and then come back and put that into law and practice in Mississippi?
Fantastic. And I'm gonna, as we pull everybody else in, I'm doing this so I can do this for the people, our tech people who've been terrific in this seminar. I'm gonna ask you one more question as we pull people in, because I was at a seminar yesterday in Baldwin, New York with AASA, and we were talking, everybody in my little group was talking about career tech ed and the opportunities right now to from basically K-12 on to link with industry. And I suspect that Jerry and Stephen and Betty, you are all thinking about that today too. You just raised it as well. So let me just ask all of you, starting with Betty, how can we kind of recenter education so it is about, or high school, junior high school. So it is about being college ready, but it's also about being career ready. And how can we do some of that and then tell the stories so that kids start feeling excited about this as well? How can we do that?
So one of the things that we want to look at it when we get to our junior and senior years of our high school students, a lot of times we're still dictating the standards in the curriculum, but we want to hear the student voice as well. We want to have teacher voice. And what do you need to do as a career and technical educator? One of the things that we always included in our curriculum was a 20% cap where we can actually make sure that our curriculum related to our local concerns or our local workforce concerns. So how do we bring that in, particularly the last 2 years of a student's high school career, where we are actually specializing in what the students want to know more about, looking more at where are you going after in your post-secondary endeavors, what would you like to do, and how do we use those 2 years as a project-based 2 years where we're actually doing things that are personalized for those scholars and actually connect them to the next level in their lives.
So Stephen, I bet, and I would love this, I think we can do this on Zoom where we can actually interrupt each other when we're only 4 people. But Stephen, you probably are thinking about this a lot as well in terms of career tech education and innovation. So why don't you weigh in here too, because it feels like this is a moment of huge opportunity for us to engage kids career-wise starting in high school.
Absolutely. And Randy, I'd actually dial that back even further. It's important to engage kids, even in elementary school, to begin thinking about what kind of careers are available to them. I grew up in a very small town in Pennsylvania. There were very, very limited jobs. Everybody I knew, their parents did one of 4 things. I didn't even know that one could become a communications professional until I came here to Washington, D.C. So, at Discovery Education, we believe very strongly that in order to be it, you have to see it. So we work with corporate partners across the country to create a series of digital resources, videos, interactives, et cetera, that are all designed to provide students a look at what various careers can do. For example, we worked with Major League Baseball, and students through our resources had the opportunity to meet an agronomist who was creating the baseball field at Orioles Park, folks at Boeing, various into 3M. So yes, we are partnering with corporate entities to create these materials and provide them to educators and students so that at a very young level, students can begin to kind of go beyond the 4 walls of their classroom to see the opportunities available to them. I'd encourage viewers to go to stemcareerscoalition.org to check out some of the great work that we're doing there.
Do you mind, Stephen, if I borrow your term in order to be it, you have to see it?
I would be honored if you did. I have to tell you, I stole it from somebody else, but I appreciate you asking.
Of course. And pretty soon we're going to see that in Chat GPT all over the place.
No doubt.
As a paragraph on what we're doing.
No doubt.
So Jerry, also, think about, could you imagine if we had pathways to journalism from, high school or middle school newspapers?
Yeah, one of the things that we like to say at the Donovan Group, Randy, is don't let the good gather dust. And so we work with schools to be able to build this strategic framework of communication. Be intentional about your communication, not haphazard. And so can you schedule these really good stories about students and their apprenticeships? Talk to business leaders and their relationships with students who are interning with them, and then schedule those communications. Video, what a great way to be able to tell these stories in 30 to 45 second snippets. But getting that content out the door and not letting it just sit on the shelf because somebody will get to it at some point down the road, builds that momentum of positive communication and truthful communication about your school as much as you can do.
So that raises, and I've wanted to ask all three of you this question, because we're all, we've all been schools people, and we're all also in, different fields right now in terms of meaning none of us are in the classroom right now. So the question I have though is this: in virtually every one of our communities, like, we could tell everybody how important we think schools are. But in virtually every one of the communities we either live in or operate in, most of the people in the communities don't have kids in school. So they're not really connected to the public schools. They don't have kids in schools. Maybe they're related to a teacher or, someone who works in a school system, even when the school system is the biggest employer. Most people are not connected. How do we use storytelling to create that connection, to make it important that what we're doing to try to educate a generation of kids is important nation building? How do we create it to get to that facts and feelings you talked about earlier on, Jerry?
I would use a word that Stephen used earlier, and that's relatability. Creating a path for the people who do the work to tell the story of their work in a very relatable way. And one way that we did this recently, and we're still doing it, is a series of short videos in which we are interviewing people behind the scenes that aren't necessarily in the classroom, but are doing much of the work to be able to keep the school functioning every single day. And frankly, these are people that many in your community will connect with. The ones that are in transportation, your paras. I interviewed a custodian a couple of weeks ago, and I asked her, I said, what's the reward for you? And her answer to me was, the reward for me is when I see one of our graduates as an upstanding citizen out in the public. That tells me that I did my job as a custodian. And that just sent chills up and down my spine. But if we don't ask them, if we don't create a path for them to be able to tell the great work that they're doing, it won't be told.
Thank you, Jerry. Anybody else on this question?
I would just like to add also that, everyone went to school. So how do we make that connection that, you're an alumni, alumnus of this district or of some school. And so, just asking, what difference did it make for you? Who is that teacher? Who is that person from that school that resonates with you and have impacted your life? I think that's very important. Also, earlier today, you said that schools are kind of a connection, or the connecting hub for the community, and actually opening doors and having events more than just academic events, but having community events, school, and inviting the community to come in, and maybe not to see what we're doing, but you just cannot help but see it if you're in our facility. So bringing community events to the building, allowing the community to come in, and hopefully from that, then that you'll glean from that some of the things that are going on in the school.
I think just to add really quickly, you may not have a child in school, but you're certainly interested in every school's outputs. You certainly want students to graduate prepared to make their way in the world, no matter what it is. I want to make sure that there are well-educated, well-trained nurses in our hospitals. I want to make sure that there are competent computer programmers. I want to make sure that individuals are prepared to continue driving forward both our country, our economy, and our democracy. If you're not interested in any of those things, well, I don't know what to tell you. But those certainly should be compelling enough for anyone paying attention today.
And that brings me to our last question, or my last question, which is about the kids, about students themselves. So what role do you think students themselves should have in this storytelling? You know, and because we see storytelling as, you know, not only building support and understanding for what public schools do, but the end users are our kids. So what role should kids have in storytelling and in the work that we're doing to advance their interests in public school?
Students definitely can tell the stories, and I believe they are attention getters. Just the fact that you would put a student on parade or on showcase, and so we have scholars, and even our youngest scholars can tell the stories of what they're learning, how much fun they're having in school. I did hear you mention, and I agree, Stephen, that we need to make connections early to our career-related education, and just to students, what do you want to be? So how is school helping you to propel to that? And so I believe our students are actually our best storytellers, because even as you listen to their speaking skills or their choice of words, it says how well they're educated. And so, and it also builds their confidence. And of course, communication skills are a part of those soft skills that they'll need when they're launching their career.
Yeah, Betty's, go ahead, Stephen.
Stephen, you're on mute.
Somebody had to do it during this meeting, right?
Exactly.
Betty, I would agree with you 100%. You know, students need to be central to our storytelling, at the heart of our storytelling. And quite frankly, there's no subterfuge with students. You can see their interest, you can gauge their excitement, and you can feel the warmth of in their words about whatever topic they're speaking on. So I would encourage everyone to make students central and at the forefront of their storytelling.
And they have in their hands often a vehicle that could be a very productive tool to be an ambassador for the school. And that's a conversation that we don't often have with them. But being able to use social media and those platforms that they're on every single day to tell the good things that are happening in your buildings. And that's a conversation that may be worth having, at least jumpstarting to see who you can engage to be able to get that done.
And that actually then presupposes that we trust our kids and we trust them to be responsible, and we give them that agency. So instead of infantilizing them, we trust them. And that would be, and they would feel that kind of trust. I mean, I think we started with the word trust. One of us said the word trust earlier on in this hour, and we're ending with, you know, we help them, we support them, we are, you know, their nourishment. That's what schools try to do. We're opportunity agents. But when students feel trusted, they feel that kind of sense of empowerment. And and they will become the most important ambassadors that we could ever have for our schools. So what I want to do is I really want to thank, as we get to the end of the hour, and you know, I'm never on time, so I've been really looking at the clock and really trying to make sure I clock this in an hour, and all of you have been absolutely terrific. I really want to thank Jerry and Stephen and Betty for joining us for this hour, for talking about how we communicate with others, how we use stories as a way of communicating, as a way of, as Jerry said earlier, you know, having the facts, touching the feelings, and really making sure that we bring community together. We also made a plug for local journalism, which is absolutely imperative, not only to our democracy, but to the nourishment of our communities throughout the country and frankly, throughout the world. But I also want to thank all of you for this great presentation, as well as the real kind of tangible hints and guidelines of how we tell stories about our kids, about our schools, about our communities, about the trajectory of our kids' lives, how we do the connections with others in the communities. And I want to thank the Learning First Alliance for this week where we honor, lift, celebrate public schools for the work that they do and that we all do as part of it, as building a nation, a better nation, a nation that's that creates opportunity for all, and that is true to our values of liberty and justice for all, the values in the Constitution, the values in the Declaration of Independence. That's what public schools are about, lifting all of that and lifting the promise and the potential of every single school child within, with who comes through our doors or comes through our online devices. So Betty, Jerry, Stephen, thank you very much for all of this. And to our Learning First Alliance colleagues and participants, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you, everybody.